I'm here in the historic chapel of Woodmont Baptist Church, and I want to ask you a question. Do you know why our church's exterior bricks are the color that they are? It's because in World War II, the only bricks that were approved for construction by the War Production Board were these non-standard, non-essential colored bricks. And that has informed every other building that Woodmont has built since that time. If you want to play Woodmont trivia, there's no one better to play with than Susan Richardson, author of From This Corner. She knows our church's history inside and out, and I had the pleasure of sitting down with her and asking her about her experience of writing and researching the history of Woodmont Baptist. Well, Susan, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you. What a privilege it is. The author of From This Corner, the book that you wrote, I guess you published it, about 4 years ago?
Well, actually, it got published shortly after you became pastor.
That's right, yeah.
Finally.
I got it in on the very end of the book, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Let me just say on behalf of our church for the hours, I can't imagine how much research and depth you put into it, but you said there were many who helped with the project.
Definitely.
Who, Carlton Carter and some of our archivists.
A lot. Well, it's very fortunate that Woodmont has this great wealth of information and people that made it possible to write the history of the church. And documenting the history of Woodmont has always been important. And evidence of this is that the day after the church was officially chartered, there was a photograph in the national banner of some of the people because the church wanted the city of Nashville to see, here we are.
It's great. So why is it important? This isn't a question I gave you in advance. Why is it important for a church to know its history?
It gives you a point from where you began and why it was important, in fact, to begin, and then how that beginning takes you forward. There's always an opportunity to look back and see what happened and how one thing that happened in 1942 impacted something that happened in 1985. Yeah. And so...
it's kind of like those that don't know the past are doomed to repeat it.
Exactly. And it's even like what William Faulkner said, that the past is always with us. In fact, the past doesn't even pass. It's still here.
That's good.
So, fortunately, we had Nan Carter and Teenie Mae Doty, who years ago started collecting information and photographs and minutes and finding a place to keep all of this. And there were other people like Bob Fulcher, Rice Pierce, June White, Clayton McLemore, Ed Wakefield, and Bill Claypool, who were also involved in previous years getting this information together and keeping it uppermost in people's mind, the importance of the history. Now, many of these names I just mentioned probably don't ring a bell.
I know most of those names. Yeah, I've read the book.
Yeah, you've read the book. But to newer Woodmont members, they're probably wondering, who are these folks? Some names the newer members may be more familiar with are Carlton Carter and Linda Hunt, Charlene Savage, Alice Kennan, Donna Lyle, Jan Bennett, and Melinda Pate. All these people were instrumental in getting the archives room reorganized and ready for the 75th anniversary. Right. A lot of hard work went into that. And in fact, it was Carlton Carter who went to Dr. Roebuck and said, it's time to have a history of the book. And so Dr. Roebuck and the deacons agreed, and thus the writing began. But even before the writing, there was this collection of interviews from Woodmont members who formerly here or currently here. Some of these interviews were on camera, some face-to-face, by phone, email, text. And so all of these, this information provided more insight into the past and how it was affecting the future. At one point, Dr. G. Allen West, who was Woodmont's first pastor from 1942 through 1967, was he wanted to write a history, and he had done a lot of preparation as far as interviewing members from that very early congregation. and he had done an outline for what he hoped to put in the book. Unfortunately, he died before he was able to do that. But fortunately for me, his daughter, Janet West Dillard, gave us all those notes and those interviews to use. And it really did give a perspective into what that little thriving congregation was like. And so that was a treasure to have. Another good fortune was a 3-hour interview done with Bill Sherman, Woodmont's pastor from 1967 through 1997, and Vita Sherman, led by a former television host and Woodmont member, LaWanna Fields.
Oh.
So there was a lot of information.
When was that interview conducted?
The interviews actually started before the book project and then just kind of rolled into that. Again, Carlton Carter saw the importance of trying to get as many people as he could on camera to talk about their Woodmont experience.
What a blessing.
Yes. And I also had great interviews with John Roebuck and you, Nathan Parker, our fourth pastor, who signed on as the book was going to print.
Right.
So in addition to all these offerings and all this knowledge, there was reading that needed to be done in the Nashville Banner, the Tennessean, the Nashville Scene, and 7 decades of the Baptist Reflector.
That's a lot of B&Rs.
Yeah. The library at the Southern Baptist Convention Building downtown, the Nashville Room at the main library, and Metro Archives also had some interesting files and photographs in some cases.
Is that kind of the things that surprised you? Did you learned a lot, obviously, about the church, but what stood out at you as something that maybe you didn't know? You've been a member here a long time, and your family has been involved in Woodmont a long time, but was there anything that stood out to you as a real surprise as you were digging through these archives about Woodmont's history and Woodmont's story?
Well, there were quite a number of surprises, and I think there's only enough time today to talk about a few of them.
Sure.
But the book was started with certain expectations that the buildings were built, committees were formed, mission trips, anniversaries celebrated, budgets met or not quite met. So the surprise was in how some of these things got accomplished then. So I'll give you a few examples of those things. Woodmont wasn't even in the city limits when the chapel was finished in 1944 because the Woodmont-Hillsboro area, as it was known then, was still considered out in the country.
Wow. I tell my friends now that, we're an urban congregation, that we're in the city, it's, so much has changed.
Yeah. And another thing that was a surprise, there was a huge rock that was in the way of extending the first education wing from the chapel further out. And so instead of blasting the rock out of existence, because it wasn't included in the budget, the decision was to build stairs around it and stairs down to the chapel.
Yeah.
So if you've ever wondered about that configuration, that's why.
But the good news is we're built on the rock, that our churches have a solid, firm foundation.
We can take that literally.
That's right. That's good.
Yes. Another surprise, a fire started by arson in 1974 almost destroyed the chapel and left soot and dirt in the entire church building. The membership showed up on Tuesday morning after the fire and started cleaning. Determined that the congregation would meet together on Sunday morning in the sanctuary and that Becky and Ed Fulcher could have their chapel planned wedding the day before.
That's great.
There was a wall in Fellowship Hall that needed to come down to open it up and create a larger space for folks to gather. So everyone showed up with a sledgehammer and brought it down in 1989. And this was 16 days before the Berlin Wall was brought down.
Wow, tear down that wall.
Yes. Another surprise, a group from Woodmont in 1977 was ready to go rebuild Guatemala City after talking with a missionary from there about the devastating earthquake that year. And the people said, can we do it? Sure we can. All we need to do is work out a few logistics. Woodmontians wanted to clean up a church, paint it, put the steeple back, provide a choir, entertain the community, and lead Vacation Bible School at a New Orleans church in less than a year after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. So the people said, can we do it? Sure we can. All we need to do is work out a few logistics. And one that's not in the book, but will be in the notes for 2020, can we have Vacation Bible School on Zoom? And the people said, sure we can. All we need to do is work out a few logistics. So, of course, out of these surprises came a revelation that in these situations, the answer was not, well, we can't do that, let's quit.
Yeah.
There was a lot of praying, a lot of phone calling, texting, emailing. There was some quiet conversation among a few people, and sometimes there was heated conversation among larger groups. But a decision got made, action was taken, and the church moved forward.
Awesome. Well, you talked earlier about, church needs to know its past because, how its beginning, impacts its future matters, and that's important. So how did Woodmont begin? What was the catalytic moment for the impetus of forming a church here on this property?
Roy Green. Roy Green was a man who was constantly seeking what else needed to be done. And so when he came to Nashville with his family, he saw that a grocery was needed in one part of East Nashville, and so he started that. It was a successful business. And then he realized Nashville had a corrupt mayor, and he was compelled to run with several other candidates in 1938 because it was needed. He didn't win, but the mayor was defeated, and Roy Green saw a developing area on the southwest side of the city of Nashville that needed a grocery because it was still a developing area. So he opened the Green Hills Market in 1939 on a quiet Hillsborough Road across from a small farm and an early version of Hillsborough High School. Then he realized the area needed a church. So while he was ringing up groceries, Roy Green asked his customers if they'd be interested in starting a new church in the area. So 22 people gathered together after prayer and fellowship and a number of meetings to officially pray, sing, and charter Woodmont Baptist Church into existence on August 3rd, 1941.
So Roy had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit that kind of was able to engender new things and kind of envision new things and get things going. And you kind of think that the Lord used him as a catalyst for getting Woodmont Baptist together. That's awesome. I think it's pretty clear in the book. You can see that Roy served well. And then he left to be a charter member of a new work.
Exactly.
Right?
Another church, Brentwood Baptist.
Brentwood Baptist.
Yeah.
That's great that he had that spirit, and not only for Woodmont, but for starting new churches as well. That's a neat takeaway. So when you look back at the story of Woodmont, I always think about the Henry Blackaby thing from Experiencing God. Where do you see God moving, and how can we join him in it? When you look back at the story, you probably know the story of Woodmont better than just about anybody.
Oh, there are a lot of people who know it well.
I don't know. You've done so much work on it. When you think over the whole story of Woodmont, where do you see those moments where the work of the Lord was so clear and so evident that the church got behind what God was doing?
Well, you see God moving in all kinds of directions. It's hard to really put it in a box and say, this is it. Because when I say the word Woodmont, try not to think about the interior of the sanctuary or the exterior of the building on this busy corner out here, but think of it as this long line of people leaving from an old high school, coming down the road to this corner, and building a community based on God's love. Then walk with that growing number of people over to a military center during World War II, and what we know is 100 Oaks now, or see that line moving downtown where a rescue mission was needed, and then you see that line moving to Mexico, to Guatemala, to Venezuela, to Russia, and to other parts of Nashville.
Yeah.
And the line keeps getting longer, of course, all that time. And the line goes to building new churches like Glenwood, Crevewood, Brook Hollow, Forest Hills, Brentwood, as well as the internal congregations that meet here from Africa or Asia.
Yeah.
That line also builds new houses and repairs other houses after unexpected floods. And then keep in mind that that line of people is also connected to a changing world where people move more frequently. So some of those people in line have had to step out of line from Woodmont and take the love of God and the family of faith feelings they built here to another city, sometimes another country, and share it with others about what they learned here. So look at Woodmont as one of many stations where God is touching people individually through community, a community focused on love, worship, teaching, and sharing. And remember, in addition to all this, that Larry Dowdy said that God is a mathematician. Yeah. So where is God moving? Do the math. Add the number of people who found community and faith at Woodmont over 80 years, and multiply that by where those people have taken God's love and message into the world.
Wow.
And you've got your answer.
Wow. Yeah, just a tremendous impact. I feel like I hear stories still in Nashville. I mean, I grew up here. I grew up, 15 miles south of here, but I still hear stories that you can connect back to Woodmont. I like to say that there's everyone has 6 degrees of separation to Woodmont. Everybody in Nashville can claim some kind of connection. And I figure there's probably around 20,000 people that gather in a church that Woodmont helped start any given Sunday in this area. And that's not even including our international partners. But you see this idea of a faith family of faith. You use that phrase. I love that phrase. That's how I describe our church a lot of times. You see this push on missions, and really before it was cool. I tell my friends before everyone else was doing it, Woodmont was doing it. And when you think about all these things of who we are, and you look back at our last 80 years, what do you think is it's a big question, but what are the overall legacies that Woodmont is leaving or has left, and that will guide us into our next 80 years? What's the story, the overarching legacy of the past 80 years?
Well, I'm going to use a phrase that Linda Hunt used the other day, which I think is most appropriate. And our legacy is that we're a boots-on-the-ground church. When you take the initial thinking of Roy Green, who saw the need for this church, and add the focus begun by that small congregation that wanted to be a Bible-centered place of faith and community, and add to that the aggressive spirit of Christian stewardship and missions that Dr. West built with the congregation, you have the start of a powerful legacy. And then that legacy was adopted and expanded by every new pastor and the staff here through the church's history. No one ever said, okay, we're going to change that. It was like, that's what made us initially. We're going to take that forward. So the long history of involvement with missions established in the 1950s, both in Nashville and the world, means that this church has never been shy about the idea of getting out there and doing something.
Yeah. Today I was at a meeting at Hillsborough High School this morning, and one of the ladies in the front office said, thank you for the bags, the food bags that we provide every week. But then she said, thank you for the check. And I said, what check? And she said, last year before COVID hit, we paid off their lunch debt in their cafeteria. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And she said, that was incredible. And those are those things that God does that I think fit in that aggressive spirit. We see a need and we can meet it. And it was over $8,000 on a one-day offering that Woodmont just stood up and said, we're going to take care of this because they're our neighbors. And we started in that building, very, very much connected to Hillsborough. So it's neat to see that spirit continues.
Exactly. Because all along the way, people have learned in that history about their individual gifts and how to strengthen them through Bible study and prayer and communing with one another as we understand grace and how to extend it to each other. Those others may be across the street or across the globe, but Woodmont wants to be there.
Yeah.
This is a powerful legacy that's taken the church from one century into another and will take us into the next.
Yeah. Have you thought about, someone recently told me that in 80 more years, it'll be 2100.
Yeah.
And we're here at 2100 Woodmont Boulevard, and it's neat to think about in the next century, in 2100, what God will be doing through the people of Woodmont. So, well, thank you for helping us look back and for helping us move forward with the knowledge of our history and our legacy and all that God has done. And it makes me excited to think about all that God will do through that entrepreneurial spirit that Roy Green had and that aggressive spirit of missions and giving and sacrifice and boots on the ground, like Linda said. I'll never forget when I was discouraged one time that Linda told me, we're going to rally the troops, and we're going to rally the troops, and that meant a lot to me. So I am so appreciative of you and your family for all the hard work you put into researching and writing the history of Woodmont's story. It really is a fascinating story about what God's done to grow this family of faith here on this corner and to touch so many lives around the world and to impact the kingdom through the work of Woodmont. We are encouraging everyone to get a copy. We still have a few left. They're a hot commodity. We are selling them for $36.51. Why is that, Susan?
Because that's what the first offering taken up by Woodmont, that's the amount.
Roy Green literally passed his
the hat
around, and they put a $36.51, and from that humble beginning, so much has been done and accomplished. So thank you again, and thank you all for being a part of Woodmont's story going forward.